Hi, my name is Sabrina, and I decided to study the American public and the Supreme Court, basically how ideological polarization affects knowledge of the Supreme Court. So, introduction. Coming into this, I kind of realized it seemed as though coming off a relatively controversial 4 years and a pandemic, we are becoming more and more polarized ideologically in our views. So more extreme, people are going to more extremes on both sides. So as a result of this, it seemed as though Democrats were becoming more liberal and Republicans seemingly are becoming more conservative. And as people are going to these extremes, they start to get more involved in politics. And as they're getting more and more involved, they become more engaged and they start to pay attention to what's happening within politics as well as the institutions within it. So I specifically wanted to study the Supreme Court and how this is affecting what people know about it. So this leads to my research question, which is, do people gain more knowledge of the Supreme Court as ideological polarization among the public increases? So for my literature review, I wanted to define what political knowledge was, and basically this is just the range of factual information that people have about politics stored in long-term memory. This comes from their ability to learn this information, the opportunity they get, and the desire to learn. Three prominent factors about political knowledge come from education, which is literally being in school and learning about politics itself. Additionally, it comes from access to the information, so media coverage. If the media covers it more, then there's going to be people who are going to know more about it. And then gender. So political issues that, like for example, pertain to women tend to know more about. So political knowledge about the court. So there is not a lot of studies that go into this. Basically, from the limited amount of studies that talk about this, conventional wisdom does suggest that people know next to nothing about the Supreme Court. And as a result of this, legal scholars and judges believe that people should have a relatively limited role in the law. So, for example, selecting judges in some areas, those are elections, and they believe that people should have nothing to do with this. Two prominent researchers in this field are Gibson and Caldera, and they suggest that conventional wisdom severely underestimates the actual knowledge level of the public. So what they found in their studies is that people tend to know more about court decisions that directly affect them. So highly salient and controversial issues in society. So for example, they did a study about Bush v. Gore back in 2000. This study asked a bunch of people knowledge questions about the court, like the number of judges, the length of their terms, etc. They did it in 2001, and they also did it in 2005. In 2001, they found that people had a relatively high knowledge level of the court, and when they repeated this again, knowledge slightly went down because it was a less salient time in America, but it was still relatively high compared to what conventional wisdom would hold. So where does this knowledge come from? Basically, this knowledge just comes from paying attention to the court. So when people have more exposure, they know more. When the media covers more cases and more stuff about judges, they know more. And then when partisans and elites talk about this in politics, people tend to know more about it. So ideological polarization. I have a full definition, but basically it's just when Democrats become more liberal and Republicans are becoming more conservative within their policy preferences. So the timeline in studying this, in the 1950s, ideological thinking was not really used in politics. It was only used by elites and a small number of Americans, usually those who were college educated. They tended not to use ideological thinking in their voting decisions because they just didn't know much about it. However, since the 1970s, ideological thinking has been used more in politics and voting decisions. Why is this happening? Well, people are more educated now than they were, and they're more ideologically sophisticated, so they can use this information in their political thinking. Additionally, there's an increasing conflict between elites ideologically, so this influences the public, and this is more about affective polarization, but the increasing negative feelings towards people on the other group tends to energize the public, and they get more involved and they're paying attention more. So another prominent researcher in this field is Fiorina, and he published this controversial book called Culture War, A Myth of a Polarized America. And he claimed that we are not ideologically split. We don't have these strong ideological feelings within our voting patterns and all that kind of stuff. And basically, he said that we're very similar to how we were in the 50s because we don't have a lot of knowledge about it, so we can't hold strong views about it. Many political science researchers do not agree with this claim. Some of them found that we still have high ideological preferences within stuff like religion and psychological preferences. It's also, another study found that the reason that there's high ideological polarization within Congress and partisans and elites is because of our public is massively polarized. And two other researchers, Abramowitz and Saunders, conducted a study that they claimed that there are high ideological political divisions within America, which goes directly against Fiorina's claim. So, coming off of this, I created my theory and my hypothesis. So, my theory is that negative emotions tend to energize the public. And as they become more energized, they become more involved in politics. And when they become more involved, they get more engaged, they participate in like political activities such as voting, campaigning, all that kind of stuff. And then once they're engaged, they pay more attention to politics and the political institutions within that. So that includes the Supreme Court. And when they pay attention to the court, they gain more knowledge. So my hypothesis is as ideological polarization increases among the American public, so does their knowledge of the Supreme Court. So research design. So when I measured my dependent variable, which was knowledge of the court, I used data from the American National Election Studies. AINS puts out these political knowledge surveys every 2 to 4 years. They ask about all 3 branches of government, but I just chose to focus on the Supreme Court. So each year they asked the question if the respondents were able to correctly identify the Chief Justice each year. I collected this data and I calculated the percent of respondents who got that answer correctly from 96 to 2016. So for my independent variable, ideological polarization, I also used AINS data from the same years. Each year, respondents were asked to rate themselves on a scale from 1 to 7, 1 being extremely liberal and 7 being extremely conservative. And then I dropped all the respondents who decided not to answer the question. And what I did was I added the respondents who put 1 and 2, 1 being extremely liberal, 2 being liberal, and then I added those who put 6 and 7, which is conservative and extremely conservative. I added those together and calculated the total percent of respondents and divided it by the total number of respondents who answered the question. And then this gave me a single variable for ideological polarization. So results. Generally, there is as ideological polarization increases, so does knowledge. But there was a few exceptions. So from 2000 to 2004, ideological polarization slightly decreased. And my best guess is that this is likely due to 9/11 and the rally around the flag effect, where people kind of came together in a time of crisis. Additionally, there was a small drop in knowledge from 1998 to 2000, as well as 2004 to 2016, and I'm currently still trying to analyze the data to figure out why this is happening. And then just one small note is that there was no data between 2005 and 2015 due to lack of access. But despite this, a line of best fit, which has ideological polarization on the x-axis and knowledge on the y-axis, there is a positive correlation between the two factors. So limits and further research. So a limit on this study was that I only had a very small data set, which is about 5 years. And also I couldn't control for all the factors that affected Supreme Court knowledge. So I can't claim there is causation. It goes a little bit beyond the scope of what I was doing. Further research should definitely analyze more political knowledge documents for more questions about the court and get a larger sample size and all that kind of stuff. And then also a longer period of time. I can only do 96 to 2016, but if future studies went back even further, we'd get a better picture of what ideological polarization and knowledge and how they interact with each other. And that's just Appendix A, and that's it.